Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
I do solemnly,
I do solemnly,
sincerely and truly declare and affirm
declare and affirm
that the evidence I shall give
that the evidence I shall give
shall be the truth,
shall be the truth,
the whole truth,
the whole truth,
and nothing but the
and
truth.
nothing but the truth.
So please take a seat, Mr. Webb. Mr. Townsend.
Good afternoon, Chair. This afternoon we will hear evidence from Mr. Stephen Webb.
Thank you.
Mr. Webb, please could you give your full name?
Stephen Derrick Webb.
And is it correct that you have provided a witness statement to this inquiry, which we have a reference for as MIL 00003?
That is correct.
Chair, may this witness statement be adduced into evidence?
Indeed, thank you.
Mr. Webb, it's correct that you originally worked at Cedars Immigration Removal Centre as a DCO in 2010.
That's correct.
And then you were promoted to a DCM, a manager role, when you moved to Brook House.
That's correct.
And was this around 2016?
I believe so, yeah.
That was the beginning of your career in terms of Brook House. At the end, you were given a final written warning by G4S, which resulted in disciplinary investigations, but then that was, and the Home Office suspended your DCO certification, and therefore, when it was revoked on the 3rd of November 2017, G4S then took the decision to dismiss you.
That's correct.
And this was following Panorama.
Yes.
I want to ask you first about your experience as a DCO at Cedars. Cedars is a specialist immigration removal centre designed for families, is that correct?
That's correct.
And you said at paragraph 16 of your statement that the same induction course was used both for DCOs who were going to work at Cedars as were working at Tinsley House and also Brook House. Is that right?
That is correct, yeah. At the start, everyone was together. We'd do the 6-week course, I believe it was. Whoever was going to Tinsley and Brook would then leave after we got our accreditation exams. And then at Cedars, we then went on for a further training with Bernardo's, I think, and Nathan Ward.
So the only difference between the training at Brook House and Cedars was that if you were working at Cedars, you'd have this additional training course.
Yeah, because obviously we did, because we were going to deal with families, we did child safeguarding and stuff like that.
You say in your witness statement, paragraph 16, that Cedars and Brook House were tremendously different.
Very much so.
Why do you say that?
Cedars was the only one in the world. There's never been one since either. So it was made to be a very calm place because obviously there's going to be children there. There was pictures on the wall. It was very nice, had a garden. The rooms were like a hotel suite really. So when the family would arrive, obviously they'd be quite stressed. It was made to be very friendly for the children. So yeah, but we were very rarely used. So it was most of the time it was empty.
And in terms of your role as a DCO at Cedars, would you describe that one as one of care and welfare?
Yeah, obviously there was Bernardo's there who were there to deal with the children, but we were mainly there to deal with the adults. But as I say, there wasn't many adults. Not many people came through. So.
And you were there to deal with the adults. Assume they were awaiting an immigration decision, much like detainees at Brook House were.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, but I think the longest they would stay with us was a maximum of 3 days, because of the children and the welfare of the children.
So you said that your role was a caring one and more of a welfare role. How did that differ from your role at Brook House?
I carried on the caring side of it, I would like to think. Because obviously Brook House is a massively different environment. I think, as we heard this morning, it is basically a Category B prison for all intents and purposes. That's what it is. You can't open a window, you can't do anything. You know, that's what it is. So it's a totally different environment. But I don't believe you always try and care for people.
You were then made up to be a DCM. Did you feel prepared for the role of DCM?
Yeah. Whilst I was at Cedars, I did a 6 months secondment. But as I say, not many people came through Cedars, so you're basically looking after an empty building, to be honest with you.
Where did you do the 6 months secondment?
At
Where to?
Cedars. Cedars.
I see. And in terms of your DCM role, did you have any specific training to be a DCM?
Not specifically, no. Not as in, right, this is how it's going to be, because obviously when you're studying to take your DCM exam, I suppose, you're kind of learning the role, and you shadow for a bit, but that's about it.
Darren Thompson said yesterday that there was no training at all.
Cedars, there was. I'd say when I did my secondment at Cedars, because obviously we had time to train. But Brook House, I wouldn't imagine there's any.
So you did have some training at Cedars
Yeah.
to be a DCM?
Yeah, because we had time.
And what did that training consist of?
Shadowing, and that was shadowing really, but as I say, not many people came through, so it was quite easy.
Was there a recruitment process? Did you have to pass an assessment?
Yeah, there was an assessment for it, yeah, like an online test which you had to pass and get a certain grade.
And was there anything more than an online test? Was there any practical type of examination?
You had to pass an interview as well, but that was it. No, there's no practical test, so to speak.
I want to ask you now about instructor training. You became a CNR instructor. When was that?
Whilst I was at Cedars, because we had time to train. We had time to learn things.
And what motivated you to apply to be a CNR instructor?
What motivated me for the whole job, I thought it was a career path. I thought I could have a good career.
We know from other witnesses, including David Webb, to this inquiry, that the instructor course was a one-day assessment at the NTRG. Was that your experience?
Yeah, I think you were told to learn a part of the manual, to do your classroom work where you stand up in front and you actually teach the class. And you also have to learn a part of the manual to do the physical side in the dojo.
Did your paths ever cross with Nathan Ward?
Nathan Ward was part of the training for Cedars.
And he says, in terms of the instructor course, that there was a toxic masculine culture within the national training courses with the NTRG trainers, and that they demonstrated sexist and macho attitudes. Did you experience any of that?
Not at all.
He also records staff being trained at Brook House in what he describes as degrading ways, and he describes it as a byproduct of NTRG culture. So that this included forcing officers to dress up in boiler suits and helmets to do warm-ups, and being made to do press-ups if they make a mistake. Do you recall these training practices taking place?
It's important for staff to get used to the PPE. So towards the end of the course, we would make them do warm-ups. But I'm quite offended if he says it was all done like that. No, I don't have any recollection of that. I'm quite proud of the work I did there.
I want to ask you about mental health, both of detention centre officers and detainees now. You say in your witness statement, paragraph 30, that you wouldn't be surprised to hear that either DCMs or DCOs or detainees suffered a deterioration in their mental health whilst at Brook House. In your view, did the impact of detention and being at the detention centre equally affect both?
I believe so. The introduction of more foreign national offenders totally changed Brook House, totally changed it, and more people were suffering from stress and mental health issues, and I was one of them.
When you say people, are you talking then about DCOs and DCMs,
DCOs, yeah.
the staff?
Yeah.
And why was it that the introduction of ex-foreign national prisoners made a difference?
Because they were extremely violent, and we weren't trained to deal really with that. They come from an environment extremely similar to ours, but we don't have batons, we don't have parva spray, we don't have the powers of search. It's holiday camp for them.
And was it a problem to you that you didn't have the same powers as prison officers?
It wasn't a problem, but it made our life an awful lot more difficult because they took full advantage of that.
In what way did they take full advantage?
One of them, I clearly remember, he was very surprised that he gets a kettle in his room and a telly in his room. He hasn't got to earn it. He hasn't what he called a good boy chip. And he says, what happens if I break the kettle? You just get another one. Because we have to supply you with a kettle and we have to supply you with a telly. What happens if I break the telly? You'll just get another one.
Was that your experience generally with detainees, or is that just one example?
Not all the detainees, not all of them. Some of them, more of the detainees that were there just because they overstayed their visas, sort of retreated back into their rooms more, I suppose. And it was basically the foreign national offenders which were coming out, running the wings, be first in the queue for food.
Did you see that there was a problem with mixing the foreign national offenders with other people, for example, as you said, people who have overstayed their visas?
I believe there was, yeah, because people then ended up going around in groups because they were only there because they overstayed their visa, they were just waiting for an outcome, and now all of a sudden you've got people that are walking around threatening to, so to speak, shank you. If you don't get out of the way, I'm first in the queue. Get out of the way. So you'd have little groups of people that were too scared to be on their own. So.
And you mentioned people who overstayed their visas, were there also asylum seekers as well?
Yeah.
People who are fleeing persecution?
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
And did you see them as more vulnerable, perhaps, to what you've described?
Yeah, obviously they were, yeah. Some of them were, it was a mighty shock, you know, they've been picked up and they've basically put in prison with no open windows, very small courtyards, and it's all new and they may not be even able to speak the language. So it's extremely hard to get information through to them, and then you get the ones which come from all the prisons and they're in a gang environment anyway, and it was extremely difficult to manage, and some brave officers got out, I think.
You said that detainees suffered a deterioration in their mental health at Brook House. What do you think the cause of that was, if you're able to say?
I think the not having an end date, not having and even some of the foreign national offenders would say this is worse than being in prison, because prison you can count the days off. You can have it on a calendar, you can see when you're leaving. There's no out date, it's just endless, I suppose, and an awful lot of them said that was quite cruel, and I believe it was.
You've referred also to staff suffering from a deterioration in mental health, and you also say at paragraph 20 that staff morale was low. Why was that in your view?
Well, I definitely suffered quite strongly. Staff were on the wings for probably 12 and a half hours, especially the wing staff that come under me. We should have had a quota of staff, 4 to 5 on a wing. We ended up sometimes with 2. I struggled to get them on lunch breaks because I didn't have enough staff to cover them for lunch breaks. I don't remember ever having a lunch break when I was there. My days ended up being 16, 17 hours long. And I know it affected the DCOs a lot because they couldn't get breaks, they couldn't even get outside to see, you know, in the courtyard. Sometimes I couldn't open the courtyards because I just didn't have enough staff. So we couldn't get, you know, sports going. Yeah, and obviously the more frustrated the detainees got, the more angry they got, and they took it all out on the officers.
You said that you've found it difficult and have developed mental health issues since being at Brook House.
Mm-hmm.
You also say, paragraph 6 in your statement, that you've put an enormous amount of effort into trying to forget Brook House.
Mm-hmm.
What experience did you have at Brook House which you feel that you need to forget?
I was, as I say, I was, not that it's any fault of Brook House, but I live an hour and a half away. So I had a 3-hour commute to work. I would often be in work an hour early because I just didn't have enough time to do my manager work, my staff appraisals, my audits. So I'd often go into work an hour early just to try and get ahead of myself before I got called up to SMT and got told off for being behind everything. Because once 8 o'clock happened and unlock, I was on the wings, I was being called left, right and centre. Probably a few first responses that I'd have to deal with. Officers being threatened, officers, you know, I'd be called everywhere.
I want to ask you now about staff culture. Firstly, about what you've mentioned there about being overstretched. Was that fair to say?
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
You've said in your witness statement, paragraph 23, that there was a serious problem with understaffing and that there were only 2 DCOs per wing and sometimes you had to do a lock-up on your own.
Yeah, that's right, yeah.
You're
never on your own, but it should be easier than one person locking up and one person making sure the count's right. You know what I mean? But yeah, it was totally overstretched. And
did that feel safe to you, locking up on your own?
I personally never felt a threat, but I'd imagine if I was a female officer or a slightly smaller officer, perhaps I may have, especially with some of the more violent detainees. I imagine some of the DCOs felt threatened, especially when you're on the top floor. You're on the 3rd floor, and if anything happened, it would take a bit of time for anyone to come up and help you.
You said at paragraphs 33 and 34 of your statement that there was no time to carry out all of the duties and give proper care. Frustrated detainees in some instances contributed to aggression. You also say that staff were stressed and constantly on edge and alert. Were they frustrated too? Were you frustrated?
I think the underlying, you could walk onto a wing and you could sense staff were nervous. So I'd always try and reassure them, a little bit of humour, I suppose, just to make sure, look, that's all right, I'm here. I think staff are more nervous because you don't know what's going to happen that day. So I think that did affect the culture. But I never saw anything bad, but I think people were very nervous because it was getting a very violent place. Threats were being made, and the threats got worse. It didn't particularly worry me being threatened, you know, I'm going to stab you and all this. But I imagine if you were slightly smaller or more timid, having someone come up to you that's 6 foot, you know, I'm going to shank you next time you come up here. I imagine that would affect you. Yeah.
In Do you think that that frustration that some staff had with the system, with not being able to give have a system of incentives and punishment and so on as you would in prison, do you think that was a common problem? Do you think that was a common issue that other staff felt as well?
I think everyone was frustrated. They'd run a training course. You'd have 20 new staff, and within a week you got 3 of them left because everyone either dropped out, wasn't prepared for what the wings were really like, or so people would put time and effort, especially some of the more experienced officers, which I became more and more reliant on as less and less managers were about. I became more reliant on the experienced officers to run the wings when I couldn't be there. So I think everyone was frustrated, and they put their time and effort into training people, and they wouldn't come back after their first leave. You know, their first week, they'd go off for a weekend break, and you'd never see them again.
So staff were frustrated at the lack of staff, or the staff
Absolutely,
attrition rates?
Yeah.
Do you think that this frustration ever contributed to acts of aggression by staff towards detainees?
No, personally, no, I didn't see any of that. I think staff are more nervous about what was going to happen.
Did you watch Panorama?
I've watched it once, yeah.
And what did you think of the of what you saw?
Personally, I think it was very well edited. It's not my total experience of Brook House. It was extremely well edited. Certain things shocked me. They definitely did shock me, and people said things that I've worked quite closely with in the past, and that's not them at all.
Could you give an example of that?
That would be John Connolly. I've worked with John on a few occasions, and that's not John at all. That's not John whatsoever. I've never heard him use language like that, and I can only assume John was going through an episode or something. I don't know what was it, but I imagine that's not the John I know.
So just pause there. You don't think that was edited then? We're talking about John Connolly
Well, obviously
using
no,
the N-word.
because that was obviously on camera.
Yes.
But why he would be saying it, that's not the John I know.
You also describe in your witness statement, paragraph 17, that Brook House was toxic, but you don't say that the culture, that there was a culture of abuse or mistreatment of detainees. What do you mean by that the environment was toxic?
Rumour was going around that they were going to put a third bunk in the ground floors, and an awful lot of experienced staff said, you know, if they do that, I'm off. Then the rumour was confirmed, and it just so coincided with Gatwick Airport doing a massive recruitment for their security, so we lost loads overnight. And it was toxic in the way that when they put the new beds in, we moved an awful lot of detainees out to other centres. They never came back. The only people that came back were foreign national offenders in their droves by the busload, and we weren't set up for that. And it was toxic in the way of threats of violence. People were more stressed. I certainly was more stressed, and I was running all 4 wings on my own at that point, because my opposite number was a very experienced manager, and he had to be Oscar 1 because we were Oscar 1s down.
And who was that?
That was Dave Roth. He's a very experienced officer.
Dave Ruffy.
Dave Roth, yeah. And obviously we were Oscar 1s down, and the Senate can't run without an Oscar 1 or an Oscar 2. Those are the musts. And obviously we needed an Oscar 1, so Dave Roth stepped up as an Oscar 1, but I was left running all 4 wings. Running 2 wings is hard enough, running 4 wings is virtually impossible.
Your explanation for this understaffing in your witness statement, paragraph 23, is that G4S, being a private company, they seek to maximise profit. And the most obvious manifestation of this was constantly low levels of staff. What made you think that?
I'd often, where I was in charge of Ewing, that was one of my main wings. I'd have the rounds of the duty director, so I basically had an audience with a SMT every morning, and you'd say that we desperately need staff. He said, yeah, but I can't get the funding.
Just pause there a moment. Who said that they can't get funding? Do you remember?
Not offhand, I do believe it was Steve Skitz, I think, was that particular instance. But all of them were saying that it's not in their hands, it's not in their hands. Which I believe it, I don't think it was. I think obviously people above them with the purse strings would say, right, we've got the money now, do a recruitment drive, because I know it was quite expensive to run an actual recruitment day and book hotels and have an actual day and then get people through the training.
You say at paragraph 21 of your statement you don't believe that there was a culture amongst DCOs and DCMs which encouraged mistreatment, or that there was a racist culture. But the incidents on Panorama, you say, are a product of relentless stress and horrors officers had to deal with on a daily basis. You've mentioned just now about you being very overstretched and understaffed. That, I assume, is what you meant as the cause of the relentless stress. Is that right?
What, racism or?
No, you're understaffing.
Yeah, understaffing and the influx of very violent foreign national offenders.
You said the relentless stress and horrors. What horrors are you talking about?
I don't remember horrors.
I'll read your the paragraph of your witness statement. You said the incidents in Panorama are a product of the relentless stress and horrors officers had to deal with on a daily basis. Do you know
horrors? Yeah,
what you're referring to there?
As in being told that you're going to get shanked if you come up here. You're going to get the kettle, which is mainly if you're walking along the wings and you're looking in the rooms, you could always tell the room of a foreign national offender. There would be a kettle half full of water, open with an open bag of sugar. Because if you do anything wrong, that sugar's going in the kettle and that kettle's going over you.
Did that ever happen whilst you were at Brook House?
I believe a kettle was thrown over various people that didn't have sugar in it.
It didn't what, sorry?
Didn't have sugar in it. Because that's known as prison napalm.
And do you know when that happened?
Not offhand, no.
Could it have been during the relevant period in April to August 2017?
I couldn't pinpoint a date, but I think it happened on 2 or 3 occasions that kettles were thrown with water in it.
You've mentioned, as I said, the stress and horrors that officers saw. Do you think that in any way contributed to what we saw in Panorama?
Possibly, yeah. I can't really say. From my own personal experience, it would probably, but no, I can't say 100%.
Do you think that the way that officers treated detainees that was seen on Panorama was as a coping mechanism?
As I say, I believe it was very well edited, and you don't know the backstory to all these particular things that go on.
I'll just pause there. Do you think the incident with Jan Pascali with D1527, do you think that was edited?
No, obviously that was a bad incident. And obviously there was no de-escalation, but I wasn't there. I didn't work with Jan, so I can't comment on that.
I want to ask you now about use of force. You said in your witness statement, paragraph 48, that the burden of carrying out CNR interventions fell on the same group of staff because others were reluctant. Would it be staff that would volunteer for use of force incidents, or would
No
they
one
be chosen?
really volunteered for use of force because it wasn't very nice. It was hot, it was sweaty. You're going in and you're going to put hands on someone. No one actually volunteered for it. You sort of dreaded the call coming on the wing that go and get your PPE.
Why would you dread the call?
Because it meant you have to do use of force.
And why didn't you want to?
Because it was always a last resort. No one relished the thought of going into a room where you might get hurt, they might get hurt, and you don't know the outcomes completely. You do your best, but no one relishes the thought of going in and hurting someone.
Nathan Ward, in his witness statement, I don't need to turn it up because I'll tell you, paragraph 233, he says, as a former CNR instructor, that it was evident that certain staff who regularly engage in CNR visibly, I quote, enjoyed the adrenaline rush, and he considered this was reflective of a broader macho-aggressive culture. Do you recognise that?
No, not at all. Macho-aggressive? No, not macho-aggressive culture, not at all. No one actually looked forward to CNR. I would say an awful lot of people were chosen, because not at the beginning, but the foreign national offenders with their violence and their comments of threat. If you were an Oscar one and you had to pick a team and you're possibly going to send people into a room with a detainee that's known for weapons, especially concealed weapons, and is stating that the first person through the door is going to stab, you would choose the relative team to go in. But it's got to be proportionate and it's got to be necessary. So if you're sending in a 6 foot team, everyone's over 6'4", on someone that's 5'1", you have to justify that, and he would have to justify that.
But the use of force incidents, they weren't always to restrain violent detainees, were they? There were other reasons for why force was used.
Yeah, possibly if you're cutting off a ligature.
So
trying
self-harming.
to save someone's life, yeah.
Self-harming could be another reason as well.
Yeah, and also towards the end, spice. You may have to move someone about because obviously they're thrashing around and they're going to hurt themselves. So you're trying to, make them safe. So any time you put hands on someone, the use of force report will be done.
John Connolly also gave evidence to this inquiry. As you know, he was another CNR instructor, and he agreed with you and said that certain officers were picked all the time, the same officers. But he said some of them absolutely, I'll be honest, some of them absolutely loved it. He then proceeded to list a number of officers who he considered loved it, including Jan Pascali, Sean Nichols and Darren Lunn. Do you know those officers?
I know of them.
Did you believe that they loved CNR?
I don't believe anyone loves CNR, to be honest with you. I certainly didn't.
Do you maintain your view then that none of the officers that were picked for CNR relished it?
Yeah, I stick by that statement, yeah.
I want to ask you now about something that John Connolly said in his evidence in relation to MMPR.
Right.
You'll remember that this was introduced, or maybe you don't know, but he told us it was introduced in 2015, 2016. And he said that it was introduced in the recognition that CNR was unfit for purpose. He said you couldn't keep someone in holds without getting into a medical emergency, and also you couldn't de-escalate that situation if a person was being held against their will. CNR training was a Mini, and MMPR was Rolls-Royce. He said MMPR was a softer, calmer approach, which was better for officers than detainees. He said there was and some apprehension from the older officers that we were going a bit soft. Do you remember when MMPR was introduced? Was it introduced in
I don't
2017?
remember too much about MMPR, to be fair. Towards the end, John Connolly was the CNR coordinator. He took quite a lot of pressure off the other CNR instructors because he would then book refreshers and all that sort of stuff. So he would probably be dealing more with the MMPR than I would. From what my recollection of MMPR is, it would be a good technique for a less violent person. But if they are violent, you still need full control and restraint.
And can you explain just briefly what MMPR is?
Not offhand, no, not because you'd have to have a manual, and I wouldn't like to say off the top of my head what it is without facts.
So you don't remember that this was introduced for all staff in 2017? This is what he says.
No. It may well have been, but whether I'd gone by then, I don't know. I have no idea.
I want to ask you about two specific incidents of use of force. The first involves D642, and it's a use of force incident that occurred on the 3rd of August 2017. I'm just going to summarise what this was about. I'm using a summary from John Collier's report, page 50, paragraph 191. I don't think it's necessary to bring up on screen, but you tell me if you agree if this is a fair summary of what happened. He says, following an act of self-harm, a group of detainees gathered around the scene when healthcare arrived to provide emergency treatment. As staff dispersed the group, D642 became abusive and threatening towards staff, and then threw water over DCO May and was restrained by staff. He continued to struggle and at one point managed to break free. Force was again used, and D642 moved until he dropped his weight and stated he could not breathe. Restraints were removed and D642 was moved with staff to CSU. Is that a roughly a fair summary?
Yeah, roughly. Yeah, I think. I remember hearing a scream, and someone shouted water, so I instantly thought kettle. He was. He did escape. I think that's the closest I've come to losing the wing, to be honest with you.
To losing what, sorry?
Losing the wing.
The wing?
Yeah.
What do you mean by that?
Because everyone was out, and obviously when something like that happens, people tend to congregate, and onlookers, and everyone's shouting, cheering, and generally making as much noise as possible, and then people start interfering, and it was very important to get him off of the wing as quick as possible.
Was that in relation to D642, in relation to the water incident?
Yeah, I do believe that was, yeah.
I want to just take you now, if Zainab could bring this up on screen, please. Mr. Collier's report, INQ 000111, and it's pages 52 to 53. It's paragraphs 204 to 207. These are the areas of concern. Mr. Collier is an expert that the inquiry is commissioned into looking at various use of force incidents. He's raised these areas of concern. Paragraph 204, he says, as you've just mentioned, any restraint used when a full landing of detainees being present carries a risk of escalating the situation. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely.
Consideration should always be given to the situation and how to avoid causing further issues by staff actions. Carrying out a restraint in a full wing of detainees is highly emotive and has the potential to cause unrest within a detainee group. If the throwing of water was a potential start of further threats to staff, then using force would be appropriate. If it was a solitary action, the risk of harm was no more than getting wet. And then DCM Webb states it was hot, just water. DCO makes no comment over the water temperature. If it was hot, I'd expected him to record the feeling of hot water on him. I'll come back to that in a moment.
Where it says hot water on him, I didn't get the hot water. It wasn't thrown at me. It was
I
thrown
understand, because you came out afterwards.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I'm
sure,
going to
okay.
come to that in a moment,
Right,
thank
okay.
you. He also says, paragraph 205, that staff state they tried to use guiding holes to remove the detainee. There were low-level techniques used, and they applied correct restraints, and the detainee went to the ground. So there was no obvious reason for delay, and based on what he could see in the footage, not appear to be any techniques that were inappropriate or disproportionate. We'll just go down to paragraph 213, just at the end. My concerns are the initial justification for using force and the lack of evidence to support this decision. No body-worn activation from the DCM. I'll come on to those two criticisms separately if we can break that down.
Mm-hmm.
So firstly, in terms of the initial justification for using force and the lack of evidence to support it, Zainab, if I could ask you to bring up CJS 005587. That's page 9. Chair, it's tab 14.
Thank you.
And we'll see towards the end of that page, this is, I should say, DCM Michael Yates's statement. And in the middle of that block paragraph, in the middle of line of the page, that it was at that point D642 then returned to his room and came back out with a bottle of water that he emptied onto DCA Albert's face. At this point, I then took hold of D642 left arm in a guiding hold and tried walking him down the other side of the wing. So that's what DC and what Yates says. Then if we can turn to page 13, that's the witness statement of DCO Jack May. And again, about the same part of the page, we see detainee D642 then walked into a room and then came back out of the room with a bottle of water and chucked over myself, a detainee custody officer, Anasia. I grabbed the bottle out of his hand and the water went everywhere. And then I want to refer you to your statement on this, which is at page 17. And again, halfway down the page, you say, I then went across to talk with a detainee, with detainee D642. He then moved into a room and I moved back to the other detainee that had made cuts to his neck. Then I heard a shout and looked over and there was a scuffle and officers were holding D642 who had thrown hot water over an officer. Were you present at the time that the hot water was, or the water was thrown?
I was dealing with another situation. I didn't actually see the water. I just heard the words water.
So why did you think it was hot water?
Because that's the worst case scenario, isn't it? And as soon as you hear water, you instantly think kettle, because that's the high state of alert you're on.
When did you realise that it wasn't hot water?
Probably some time afterwards. I think I asked Anissa and he said no, it was cold. So I went, all right.
And when did you write your statements compared to when the event took place?
I wrote the statement afterwards, but I thought it was important to put hot water down, because that's what I thought it was.
Why do you think it was important to put hot water down when you didn't know whether it was hot or cold?
Because that's what I assumed it was. And it's important to put down everything you think, for clarity.
When did you have this a conversation with Anasia about whether it was hot or cold, before or after?
During the incident, as in she was physically wound up, I think, and I think I sent her to the office.
So if she told you during the incident that it was cold, why did you put in your statement that they had thrown hot water?
Because that's what I thought it was, hot water. And I thought it was important to put that. Hence my justification for use of force. It was justified for good order of the establishment.
But you didn't say there who I thought had thrown hot water over an officer, did you?
No, I heard the word water, which I instantly thought was hot water.
You didn't say in that statement that you heard the word water.
Well, that was my justification.
I'll just read it to you again, so you've got it. I want to be fair to you, Mr. Webb. Then I heard a shout, and I looked over, and there was a scuffle, and officers were holding detainee D642, who had thrown hot water over an officer. That suggests that that's a fact, isn't it? That's what happened.
That's what I thought it was. I thought that was fact at the time.
At the time of writing your statement, though?
No, writing my statement, obviously Anissa had told me it was cold, but at that particular point in my statement, I thought it was hot water.
You were the DCM, so
I was.
you were responsible for that use of force incident. Did you add that the fact that it was hot in order to justify that use of force?
No, the scuffle was already happening. People were hands on already. Regardless of whether it was hot or cold, you don't throw water over an officer. Good orderly establishment. I had to remove him from the wing because that was going to escalate, and I could have possibly lost the wing.
I want to ask you about the first page of that document. Ask Zena to bring it on the screen, please. This is the second criticism that Mr. Collier makes in relation to this incident. You'll see right at the top, camera used, top right-hand side, yes, no, and circled no.
Mm-hmm.
Are you aware that you ought to have turned on your body-worn camera for every incident?
Yeah. Turning your body-worn camera on is a habit, and I hadn't got into the habit. I'd come from Cedars where you're used to wearing body-worn, but you never used it. And it is a habit. As soon as something happens, you turn your body-worn on, and I hadn't got into the habit, and I totally accept that was an error on my behalf, and it was a learning curve.
So you'd been at Cedars. Do you think you moved to Brook House in 2016? Can you remember what month it was, roughly?
I can't know, but I think I was told on the Friday, and on the Monday I was starting at Brook. I think I didn't even get to say goodbye to anyone, really.
Remember what season it would have been? Was it spring, summer?
I think it was summertime, I think.
Summertime. This incident took place in August, so you would have been at Brook House for a year. Are you saying that you still hadn't got into the habit of turning your camera on within a year of being at Brook House?
During an incident of any type, I admit I should have turned my camera on. Yeah, I should have done, and that would have saved an awful lot of, and it would certainly save this question, wouldn't it?
Yes. And do you think that turning on your body camera is important in order to protect a detained person?
Yeah, it definitely protects them. It sort of protects everyone and gives clarity to the situation.
What about de-escalation? Does it help in de-escalating an incident that's being flared up?
It can do. It can fire someone up sometimes. A couple of times I put my camera on and they said, "You're filming me," and that was actually it actually escalated it. But it was, it could do both, because they didn't like being filmed. They didn't want their faces or something on camera, and I used to say, "Look, no one's going to see it, it's all right." But they didn't like being filmed.
I want to ask you now about a second incident, and that was with D191. This is on the 24th of April of 2017. Again, I'm going to just summarise briefly this incident from Mr. Collier's report, and you can tell me if this is a fair summary. It's paragraph 167, no need to bring it up on screen. Staff were alerted to sounds of shouting and screaming and found D191 acting bizarrely. They moved other detainees, but D191 then struck a detainee on the head with a remote control. Force was used to prevent further risk of harm, and they escorted D191 to the CSU. Healthcare attended and noted minor injuries. Does that remind you of the incident?
Yeah.
And does that sound accurate?
Yeah.
Ask to please bring up on screen CJS 005549. If we just go to the first page, it's tab 3. We'll see there that this was an unplanned use of force. You can see that from the main box on the right-hand side, it's circled. And we can also see that the reason why force was used was ticked as maintain good order and discipline and protect a third party. Then we can also see just above that is a box on the right-hand side which says handheld camcorder, body-worn camera, no. Again, but no body-worn camera was used. If we can just scroll down, please, we'll see that the location of the incident was A-wing, that's the middle right, and the detainee was relocated to CSU. We can turn to page 4, please. Just scroll up, please. Thank you. So the supervising officer was you, S. Webb. If we can turn over the page to page 5, we can see that healthcare was not present during the incident. If we can then go to page 9. This is a report of injury form, or should be. Page 19, apologies. We'll see that section 2, both those boxes A and B are left blank there. It says to be completed by the incident reporting officer. Who usually is the incident reporting officer?
I can't rightly remember. It might well have been me. I don't know. I can't remember.
In use of force incidents generally, who is usually the incident reporting officer? Is it a DCM?
Yeah, it would be a DCM, yeah.
Is this the same as the supervising officer?
No. Supervising officer can be anyone.
When you say anyone, do you mean a DCO or a DCM?
Yeah.
And was it normal for the supervising officer to be the same person as the incident reporting officer?
I can't rightly remember offhand, but I think incident reporting officer may have been the first person that have seen it or done it. I can't rightly remember, to be honest with you.
But you accept that could have been you?
Yeah,
on this
I
occasion?
accept that. Yeah.
And do you know why, if it was you, that you didn't fill out this form, this part of the form?
Because he didn't have any injuries, or I don't know. I have no idea, to be honest with you.
Just turn over the page, please, Zainab. You'll see there that there were some injuries. It says call to CSU, detainee placed on Rule 40, attacked another detainee, however he apparently knocked face on table in room, swelling to right eye, apparent, no open wounds noted. And that's signed at the bottom there by Donna Batchelor, someone from the medical staff.
Yeah.
So do you accept that there should have been somebody, whether it was you or not, that should have filled out that first section?
Yeah, I admit that, yeah. That may well be healthcare's department.
Just pause that. It wasn't healthcare's department if it said that
no,
it should have been incident reporting officer filling it out,
yeah,
is it?
Probably, yeah, I accept that then, yeah.
I want to now play you some CCTV of the incident. It's disc 3, use of force 109, 27 April 2017. And it's only 3 minutes or so. 6 minutes 11, please, to 9:09. And just before we start, it's quite difficult, I accept, to see what's going on here because there are lots of different screens and lots of different angles, and also a lot of it is blurred out. And that's so. What I'm going to suggest is, if we put along the top letters rather, so A, B, C, D, cross from left to right, and then numbers down the bottom 1, 2, 3.
Right.
And I'm just going to call out what's going on, or rather which screen to look at
Right. Yeah.
as it goes. As you know, CCTV is silent, so there won't be any noise. So if we can start then the video, please, at 6:11. And if we can look at D1, so it should be the top
Yep.
right, yes. Thank you. Just pause there a moment. Is the person in the white you?
Yeah, I think. Yeah, it is me. Yeah, I can't hide, can I?
And the black strap across you, what's that for?
That's the body worn camera.
Okay. Please continue, thank you. So it's D1, you've gone out of shot there at the top right screen with the detained person.
Mhm.
I think you'll be appearing now. You can see
Yeah.
B1 and B2. Sorry, A1 and A2 rather. You can see you coming towards the camera with the detained person. And you can see C3 right at the bottom there, going down the stairs. And then you'll see at C2 coming down the stairs in the middle of the screen. And then you come out again right at the bottom in B3. And then you appear to be taking the detained person into a room. Or rather, not. In fact, not into a room. I think it's
Yeah, Eden Wing. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. And you can see in the bottom left there, walking across a screen, walking on over the wing. Then you come up again at D2 at the middle right screen. And is that on E-wing?
That's in CSU. That.
CSU.
Yeah.
Is a search going on?
Yeah, it's
there?
a quick, brief search. Make sure he hasn't got any blades, anything like that. You can't do a good search like that, but yeah, you're trying to make sure that when he goes in there, he's as safe as he can be. And you leave the lighter and tobacco on the outside, so he has to ask if he wants a cigarette, because obviously if he takes a lighter in with him, he can burn himself and set fire to things. So he's asked to walk in and he goes in, yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. Stop the video there. Take that down. Thank you. I want to bring up now Mr. Collier's report, INQ 000111, page 47. And it's paragraph 179 I'd like to look at. He says there were several failings in managing the incident, specifically by not summoning assistance, having healthcare in attendance, i.e. not having healthcare in attendance, activating a body-worn camera, i.e. not doing that, the lack of support staff when moving on the stairs, and lack of senior management. Whilst not altering my opinion on the use of force, it failed to follow the procedures set out in PS 1600 for an unplanned event. We know also that there was a CSU investigation into this. I don't think I need to bring it up, but it's CGS 002741, page 31, paragraphs 9.22 to 9.25, where although they found that the complaint that was made about there being excessive force was unsubstantiated, that body-worn camera should have been used, Do you accept that you failed to turn on your body-worn camera?
Yeah.
And that wasn't the first time that you'd failed to
No.
do that?
No.
We've already taken the inquiry to a previous incident involving D642 when you failed to put the body-worn camera on. Were there other incidents?
Not as far as I'm aware. You'll probably know more than I do. But heat of the moment, because that was a spontaneous incident. Healthcare wouldn't have been called till I got to the CSU. Probably I went back to E-wing, went straight into E-wing and got the nurse down. But you wouldn't call healthcare. Healthcare would come down afterwards.
And do you remember that this person you'd been concerned with had been taking spice? That was one of the concerns.
He'd been taking something, yeah. Because he wasn't acting normally. And as I say, then he attacked someone else by hitting him over the head with a TV remote, which actually broke. So.
And that's why you were alerted to the incident in the first place, because of that action?
Yeah, because he was acting, screaming, and then he was in the room, and then he struck his roommate, and then broke the TV remote. And I was worried that he might pick it up, because obviously it's plastic, and obviously it comes sharp, so it becomes a weapon. And I was just a bit concerned that, so yeah, he couldn't do that anyway, so he had to be removed for his own safety, really.
So it's potentially a very serious incident. You'd explained that someone could have got hurt because it was could have been used as a weapon, essentially.
Possibly, yeah.
Or in fact was, because he'd hit his cellmate over the head.
Yeah.
So would you accept that you ought to have alerted more staff?
If there was more staff to actually alert, but I was more than capable of dealing with it with the officers there. There was 3 of us. I don't believe we needed, because bringing more officers onto the wing would just incite the situation, and I felt I could deal with it, and I think I did.
Why do you think bringing more officers would incite the situation? What do you mean by that?
Because if I was to call the first response, they'd all come charging onto the wing, and obviously everyone would be alerted on what's going on, when I could quite easily deal with it, which I did.
Do you think that you should have also summoned healthcare, given that this person was particularly at risk because they've been taking
Healthcare would have come
spice?
down afterwards. Healthcare would have come down afterwards because I believed he was on some sort of substance.
You didn't think of alerting healthcare during incidents or
No, because he was being threatening and hit someone on the head with a remote control.
I want to just turn over the page, please, of Mr. Collier's report and look at paragraph 182. He says the technique used on the stairs was incorrect and carried a considerable risk for all involved by either losing their footing or falling during the struggle. This would have been avoided by using additional staff as directed in training and using them as a brace for moving up and down stairs to secure the movement and to prevent falling. Do you accept this criticism?
There is a technique to move up and down the stairs, yes there is, but I don't believe it was necessary there. I was the brace. I'm more than enough. I'm more than 3 officers' weight, so I'm more than enough of a brace. And I needed to get him to CSU quickly because I wanted to get healthcare to see him because I believed he was on some sort of substance. So that would be more officers. It would take time. He needed to get to CSU. So I was more than the brace.
I want to ask you about the other aspect that Mr. Collier criticises of this use of force, which is at paragraph 190, which is over the page, just the bottom there. He says, the risk at this incident is around not applying the correct technique. He's talking about the continuing wrist flexion. For moving on, he's talking about moving on the stairs. We'll come on to the wrist flexion in a moment. If I can move, page 187. It's paragraph 187, rather. He says that he's talking about whether it was necessary or reasonable proportionate. Force was necessary, but I do believe we do not believe rather, it was reasonable to maintain wrist flexion throughout the use of handcuffs. Throughout, when the use of handcuffs would have been a more suitable option, and that would present less risk of injury. Therefore, it was not proportionate to the risk if, as suspected, the behaviour demonstrated was due to taking an illicit substance. Was wrist flexion a form of pain compliance?
You could use pain compliance, but there was no pain compliance there. The locks were loose. He was quite easily able to move his hands. He was under control. Handcuffs, I wouldn't want him in handcuffs because we always handcuff to the front. And if he's on a substance and he goes into some sort of fit, I would want to be able to do first aid on him and handcuffs to the front. He wouldn't be able to do so you put handcuffs on. As soon as a medical incident happens, you've got to take handcuffs off. And if you've seen the key and the hole of the handcuffs, it's not easy in a medical emergency to get the cuffs off. I wouldn't use cuffs because he was on something. If he went into a medical emergency, I'd have to take the cuffs off, which would waste time in me giving first aid.
Do you think that you were using wrist flexion in this instance as a form of pain compliance?
No, there was no pain being used, and if I was to use pain, I would inform him first.
Can we go now to the PSU investigation at CJS 002741, page 13. It's tab 9 of the bundle. And it's paragraph 6.5.10. So this is a complaint made by D191 that he was subjected to assault by DCOs on this occasion. If we can please go to page 13. We'll see 6.5.10 right at the top. DCO Basood. Do you remember how to say that?
Basood.
I was asked if he recalled DCM Webb advising D191 that if he did not stop screaming, he would feel more pain. He stated that he probably would say something like that. Maybe if D191 did not comply, he would feel more pressure through the wrist. DCO Basood did not recall D191 objecting about pain in his left hand whilst in the room. He may have said something about the hand en route to TSU, and he thinks that DCM Webb may have released the locks a bit. Do you agree that you advised D191 that if he did not scream, he'd feel more pain?
It's a standard practice to inform them. If you do not comply, you will feel pain. But if they comply, they won't feel pain, and he didn't feel pain because he complied. But that is the technique to be used. You must give them a lawful order that if you do not comply, you will feel pain. Doesn't mean you're going to do it, but they will feel pain, and it'll be pain. You'll feel pain through the back of your wrist.
But did you say if he did not stop screaming, he would feel more pain?
No, I don't remember saying that.
Do you accept that if he did say that, that would sound like a threat?
It would sound like a lawful order.
It'd be a lawful order to say to someone, if he did not stop screaming, you'll feel more pain.
If he wasn't complying, I wouldn't put pain on because he was screaming. I'd put pain on if he was resisting being moved, but I wouldn't put a complaint on because he's screaming.
I want to now move to the review process. If we can take, if we can put on the screen, please, Zainab, CJS 000902, page 3. You'll see that this is about D191, 17th of July, and your name is the person completing that review.
Mm-hmm.
You can see there the outcome of this review, there being further investigation required, no. Lessons learned, further training, no. Letters of commendation required, no. No further action required, no. Can I just ask you a little bit about what those reviews consisted of? What happened in terms of those reviews? What did you review, firstly?
It was dumped on my desk by senior management. it was basically I have to review the footage of all the use of forces, just to see if everything was correct, everything was right, whether further training was needed.
When you say dumped on your desk, why do you say that?
Because I had enough on my plate as it was, and then I suddenly got a mountain of other work to do, which was this.
And it says at the top there, just scroll up to the top please, Zainab, use of force review meeting form. Did a meeting take place?
It wasn't a meeting, no. It was just you review the footage. I don't know why they call it a meeting form, because it's not a meeting, it's just reviewing footage, which in the end they actually made a role of the CNR coordinator, which was John Connolly, because I think Brook House had got behind with their reviews, and hence why I got the fun of doing it.
So you got the fun of doing it, but I take it you didn't like doing them?
No. I had enough on my plate as it was trying to run the wings, so I ended up coming in on my days off to do this. So I just didn't have enough time to do it during the week.
Is that why these reviews are completed with just a tick box?
It was just a tick box anyway, yeah.
So would it be described then, is it fair to describe it as a tick box exercise?
No, you actually had to view the footage and make sure it was all correct. But then you would just tick the box. Yeah.
You say you didn't have much time to do it. Were you able to give enough time to properly review?
I came in on my days off to do it, so I did have enough time, but I had to come in on my days off.
Do you accept that in this particular incident you didn't outline any of the concerns that Mr. Collier had about the lack of turning on the body-worn footage?
Body-worn footage, yeah, I should have highlighted that. But as for the stairs, that was in my view, that was perfectly safe. We were going down sideways. I'm more than an anchor. I weigh probably more than 3 officers.
And what about maintaining the wrist flexion when handcuffs could have been used?
I don't agree handcuffs could have been used. If he went into medical emergency, I needed those cuffs off. It was a waste of time putting cuffs on. I don't agree with that at all.
You accept the very least the body-worn camera should have been activated?
Yeah, I do believe that,
yeah. If we just scroll down to the bottom, we don't see any lessons learned ticked yes, any further action required, no is ticked again, nothing there. You've not noted any concerns?
So I didn't have any concerns with the use of force.
Didn't have any concerns about
obviously the body-worn camera, but apart from that, the use of force itself, I think, was all right.
Do you accept that this form made it difficult for there to be a detailed review of use of force? The way that it's set out, the tick boxes?
There is a box at the bottom for any concerns, but it's a learning process. I imagine the form is much different now. I would imagine. I imagine it's much more concise now, but that's what it was at the time, and that's what I had to deal with.
In terms of your time, you've said that you came on your day off to do this.
Yeah, days off, yeah. It took me days to do it.
Again, given the amount of time that you had to do all these, that is not much, given that it was extra to your duties. Do you accept that you may not have given as much attention to these reviews as you ought to have done?
No, I was, for all intents and purposes, I was very good at my job, and I was very professional, I feel, during use of force. And you don't mess around with use of force, because obviously you end up in court and stuff like that, or you end up in an inquiry. But
is that the reason why you should be good at use of force, so you don't end up in court?
No, you need to be good at use of force to be good at use of force.
What do you mean by that?
Well, as in, you don't want to hurt anyone, you don't want to kill anyone.
Right.
So your techniques have to be good.
No need to bring this back up again, but another criticism Mr. Collier makes is this. He says at page 47, paragraph 180, DCM Webb cannot review incidents where he is involved as a conflict of interest and should be identified by managers. So you've here reviewed a use of force incident which you in fact were supervising. Do you see that that might have been a problem?
Yeah, I didn't know. I didn't know there was a policy and procedures that I couldn't review. It was just footage. I just reviewed it.
Do you accept that it's important that somebody independent monitors what happens in a use of force incident?
I think that actually happened afterwards, yeah, because obviously they made a CNR coordinator position.
Did you not think that at the time that you probably shouldn't be reviewing your own incidents?
I did highlight errors, hence why they made the position.
Who did you highlight errors to?
Senior management.
Who in particular?
Steve Skip, Ben Saunders.
Specifically about you monitoring the use of force incidents that you were involved in?
No, that we need someone dedicated for CNR to actually review the footage, because I couldn't give it the time. I had to come in on my days off.
So it was the time issue that you were raising, not the fact that it ought to be somebody who was independent?
No, it needs a dedicated person. You need someone to take the time, and that it's such an important thing. It needs a proper position.
I understand that, Mr. Webb, but perhaps I'm not making myself clear enough. Do you accept that it's important that you must be impartial when you're reviewing these use of force incidents?
Yes, yeah, I do, yeah.
And do you accept that it would be difficult for you to be impartial as to whether there needed to be lessons learned, further training required, further investigation required, if you were involved in that incident? Otherwise you'd be investigating yourself.
I accept that, yeah.
Be marking your own homework.
Yeah, pretty much, yeah. Yeah, I accept that.
Finally, before the break, I just want to ask you about the delays in reviews. It's paragraph 56 of your statement. So I'm just going to read it out to you because I understand that you want to have this bit deleted from your witness statement.
Yeah.
Is that? I'll read it out and you can tell me if that's correct, and then tell me your explanation. It's the last last sentence of paragraph 56. I don't recall any particular advantage or disadvantage to there being any delay between incident and review. I'm not sure I would characterise these delays as an approach. They were just most likely a consequence of needing to arrange a time when a group of people could be together. What is it about that sentence you'd like to change?
I didn't have a chance to view the documents. So when you were talking about a meeting, I actually thought you meant a meeting. But when I saw the documents, it's not a meeting, it's just a review.
I understand. And in terms of those forms, we know from that particular incident involving D191, that incident took place on the 24th of April of 2017, yet it wasn't reviewed by you until 17th of July, almost 3 months later. Do you know why there was such a delay?
No, I think that's why, obviously, senior management panicked and dumped it on my desk and said, sort that, which I did.
And do you see any problems with there being a delay to reviewing use of force?
Yeah, there is, because obviously if things are going wrong, you need to put them right straight away.
And what about memories fading? If you needed to investigate it or ask somebody for their recollection?
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
Thank you. I think it's time for a 15-minute break, Chair.
Thank you.
Sure.
We'll return at 3:45. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Webb. Townsend, thank you.
Using the evidence of Mr. Webb. Mr. Webb, I want to now move to a different topic of complaints. I don't think there's a need to bring up this on the screen, but I want to refer to a complaint that was made by D687. It's HOM 002725, page 32, it's tab 10. D687 said that you would regularly swear at him, call him a I want to turn now to D687's witness statement, if I can. It's DPG 00021. It's pages 23 to 24, paragraph 74. So it's page 23 to 24, and it's paragraph 74, just over the page. See there, 73, a manager, and he says, I've just repeated the allegation that you said, called him a prick and told him to go back to his own country. He also says at paragraph 74 that in around summer of 2016, D687 said that he was feeling low and depressed, and he was thinking of ending his own life. That was to you. He said that you attended D687's cell or room and asked him, what's the problem? He repeated that what he had told the officer, and you said, stop being a prick. Do you recall this incident?
Not at all, no. And I just say I don't use the word prick.
Do you recall going to D687's cell when he'd told an officer that he wanted to end his own life?
I can't recall. I went to many rooms when people were feeling low. I couldn't tell you.
Do you accept that if he had told you that he was feeling low, that you ought to have opened an ACDT?
I would have done that. Would have been the first thing I would have done.
And do you accept in this case that you didn't do that?
Well, I can't remember I'm pretty sure it's not me.
Page 100, paragraph 193, which is page 68. D687 says that there were officers that were being abusive during lockup and made comments such as, get behind the fucking door and you fucking immigrants go back to your own country. Do you accept that these types of comments were made?
I never heard any language of that, like that.
Not at all, or just that you didn't make these comments?
Well, I certainly didn't make these comments, but I didn't hear any comments of that nature.
I want to now ask you about two complaints which you investigated. Could you take that down, please, Zainab? The first was involving D612. I'm not going to take the documents unless you would like me to, so please say if you need reminding. Well, the first complaint was about a detainee who said that you had been aggressive towards them. That was D612. That's 21st of July 2017. Do you remember this incident? It was not only that you'd been aggressive towards them, but also another issue about missing property. Do you remember this?
I can't recall, no.
Perhaps we should bring it up on screen now.
So if you can bring it up for us.
Yes,
That might jog my
CJS
memory.
001558. It's a spreadsheet. It's line 122. So we see there 21st of July. Unfair treatment. I said in box F, he had been told to go to reception to see the Home Office, but when he asked to speak to them, no one called them, and they did not go to reception. He wanted to complain about manager Steve Webb, who was being aggressive when he was leaving with Taskcore. He said he was employed as a laundry worker, but was never paid. He also said he had a Samsung phone, which meant missing from his room when they did a room clearance. So you'll see there that complaint is about you, Steve Webb.
Yeah, I do. That was, in all fairness, that was my fault. I knew that detainee. I don't agree with the aggressive part of it. Not at all, because I got on quite well with him, but I always knew him under another name. And when he said, "Oh, you owe me money, I've been working," I looked at a list and his name wasn't on it. So I said, "Look, I can't pay you because your name's not on the list." But obviously he left with Taskcore, so I left. He left with Taskcore. I got called to my boss's office, which was Jules Williams, a few days later, and he said, gave me a telling off, I suppose, because and it was a learning curve for me because I didn't check aliases. He actually had another name. He was using an alias, but I always knew him as another name.
So there's an issue about not being paid.
Yeah.
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 If we could just scroll to the right, please, Zainab. We'll see at the end of line 122. That's fine. N, you'll see it says part substantiated, paid £10.50.
Yeah, yeah.
I see that was the money that he was
The
owed.
money, he was actually owed, but as I say, on the list, his name was on the list, but I always knew him as another name, and he always answered to another name. Everyone called him by his other name, but it was an alias, I suppose, and I didn't check on the computer system for his actual name. So, and obviously, I learnt from that.
So that was a complaint that was made against you by D612. If we can now turn to CJS 001511. It's page 5 and 6. This is a complaint that was made that you investigated, a complaint about missing property on the 15th of July, so just a week earlier. That was unsubstantiated. If we just scroll down to the final page, please. So we see there that that's you. You wrote that letter, Steve Webb.
Yep.
And that was saying that you'd investigated the complaint and found it unsubstantiated. Do you see there that there was a problem with investigating complaints where there was also complaints that had been made against you?
This
By the
was
same
done.
detainee.
This was done before he made a complaint against me.
Sure, but in general, do you see that there's an issue in that?
Well, when I wrote the letter, there wasn't an issue because obviously I hadn't had an issue with him. So it was a genuine complaint. I think it was a week after he made the complaint against me because he was leaving. So this was, and that was my findings, obviously.
Did you often investigate complaints where detainees had also complained about you?
I like to think I didn't have that many complaints. I don't know, you were just given a complaint from admin department, deal with that. So that's what you do. You deal with it.
And do you agree that, a bit like the use of force incidents, that it's like marking your own homework if you were investigating complaints against detainees who'd also complained about you?
Well, I wouldn't like to deal with someone that's made a complaint against me. Obviously, I wouldn't want to deal with their complaint because obviously, but as I say, this complaint was done a week before.
Not the same complaints, I accept. They weren't the same complaints, but they were often about the same detainees.
I don't get what
So
you-
if you were investigating a
Yeah.
complaint where a detainee had complained about you, do you see that would be a problem?
I'd probably
with
try
that?
and pass it on to someone else.
I want to move on now to disciplinary proceedings following Panorama. Firstly, into the incident which led to those disciplinary proceedings. Please can we bring up on screen CJS 001870, and it's page 2, tab 11. Whilst that's being brought up, this is an incident on the 6th of July concerning D728, who's on E-Wing, and we can see there he was on E-Wing for his own safety.
Mm-hmm.
So you see there, detainee D728 was placed on Rule 40 for jumping onto the second floor netting and iron ring wing. Whilst on the netting, D728 placed a ligature around his neck. He was on constant supervision. Maintain good order and discipline in the centre, Home Office, IMB, duty director, all aware. Have you seen that document before, this Rule 40 notice?
Yeah.
And did you know that he had placed a ligature around his neck and why he was on E-Wing?
That was obviously on my days off. I think I came into work and he was in the CSU, so, and I knew he was on the netting. So
And how did you know he was on the netting from reading this?
from being told on the handover.
So you were told in the handover that he'd been on the netting
He was on the netting.
and that there was a ligature around his neck and he was on constant supervision.
Yeah, he was on constant. Yeah.
We turn now to TRN 000017, a transcript. And on the first page, lines 78 to 80, scroll down the bottom right. It says, it attributes Charlie Francis to saying this, but it says, "You'll be staying down here permanently, you understand." The investigation report, G4S investigation report, I can bring it up if you like, but that attributes you to saying that. They say DCM Webb stated he was frustrated and whilst outside the room, he said rather, I'm sorry, I think we're going to have to go into closed. Not closed. Cut the link rather for a minute. I said the detainee's name.
Absolutely, thank you. So, Mr. Webb, just so you understand, that's because there's a restriction order preventing the names
Right.
of
Okay.
formerly
Yeah,
detained persons being, and inadvertently a name has been spoken out loud.
No problem.
Thank you. Apologies for that. Do you accept that you were the person that said that? Right, if I'm going to come back here again, you don't. You won't be going anywhere today. You'll be staying down here permanently. You understand?
I can't recall saying that, but the detainee held me responsible for keeping him down there on that day. On the review, I had to tell the duty director that he'd been abusive to staff throughout the night, which the duty director then made a decision to keep him down there.
Do you accept saying those words?
I can't remember saying those words.
Should we turn to the investigation report? It's CJS 005936, page 3. Just at the bottom there, DCM Webb stated he was frustrated and whilst outside the room said, if I have to come back here again, you will not be going anywhere. You'll be staying here permanently. Do you understand?
No, yeah, that was me then, yeah.
So you accept it was you?
Yeah, yeah, it must have been.
Okay.
It was a long time ago.
And it says there that, if you just scroll down, please, Zainab. DCM Webb acknowledged these comments to D728 were inappropriate and could be perceived as a threat. Do you still agree with that?
Yeah. And at the end of the day, cost me my career, didn't it? So
And do you agree that you were saying these to a detainee, not just about a detainee?
I was venting. I didn't say it to him. I was facing away from him when I said it.
But it
And I was walking away from him.
It was within his earshot, though. Do you agree?
He was behind the door, closed door. I very much doubt he would have heard it.
But you were trying to speak to him because you said you were directing your attention to the detainee.
No, I was walking away from him, and I was venting.
Do you accept that you had responsibility for that detainee's welfare?
Yes.
And did you accept that this could be perceived as a threat?
Yeah, possibly, yeah.
Essentially, you're saying that he'll suffer if you don't comply.
Don't comply with what?
I'd comply with an order. You say if I have to come back down here again, assuming because he wasn't complying with something, you're not going to
He'd
go
have
anywhere.
another day in CSU. Well, he'd see the duty director the next morning, and a decision would be made whether he would be moved to E-wing or stay in CSU.
If we can go back to the transcript, please. 17 TRN 00000017, page 5. It's line 56. See that, piss us off, you won't have a shower, you won't have anything. Do you agree that you said this?
In the heat of the moment, possibly, yeah.
Do you agree that this was inappropriate?
Yes, yeah, but my adrenaline levels were high. I've just come from a first response. I got called from a first response down to this. So, and I'd offered the gentleman a shower in the morning.
Do you agree that this was particularly egregious because the detainee was asking for a shower for religious purposes?
I offered him a shower in the morning, and I explained to him in the morning that the afternoons were not good because I don't have the staff, and he refused to shower in the morning.
But for religious purposes, it wouldn't have... having a shower in the morning perhaps wouldn't have been
but it does state in there, you can have a shower when I've got the staff, which was explained to me in the morning that I'm short-staffed in the afternoons because I have recreational areas, libraries, music rooms.
Page 6, please. 40, line 40, which is at the end there on the left. Charlie Francis says, just go in and take it off, will you? Yeah, I will. Just pause there. Was this in relation to paper towel that was being put on the window?
I believe it was, yeah, because he was a 3-man, he was a 3-officer unlock.
What does 3-officer unlock mean, please?
He's extremely violent. So you have to have 3 officers. When you open the door, you have to have 3 officers.
I'll continue. Top of the page, line 47. I know it's a pain in the arse. Callum Tully, no, it's all right, mate. And then you say, I'll fucking punch the cunt, I tell you. Charlie Francis says, if you don't, I will. Do you accept saying those remarks?
Yeah, and it's totally inappropriate, and it's what cost me my job.
Did you intend to punch D728?
Absolutely not.
Did you want to punch D278?
I was extremely frustrated, but I would have never have punched anyone.
Did you want to punch him?
No.
He
was behind a closed door.
You said it wasn't appropriate, and you used the kind of language of just blowing off steam in your witness statement.
Mm-hmm.
Do you still agree with that?
I think it's important to blow off steam. As I say, I've just come from a first response. I actually got called there from a first response and had to leave a first response. So when I got down there, I was expecting a scene, and then to walk in there and it's all to do with a shower. I was expecting officers on the floor hurt, I was expecting a hostage, I was expecting all kinds of things, but when it was just over a shower, yeah, I was frustrated, and I admit I shouldn't have said that, but he was a particularly challenging gentleman who I'd had previous issues with whilst he was on the wing and previous engagements with him. Because in the perfect hindsight, I would have swapped with my opposite number, because obviously I had history with this gentleman. I would have swapped out, so the other DCM on res would have taken E-wing and I would have taken one of his wings. But as I was running all 4 wings, I had no choice but to deal with them.
If you were expecting other officers to be hurt, so you're expecting something much worse than the situation.
It was just what's going through my head when I was called, because I had to come from the other side of the centre to there, and it's just, you just run through, right, what am I going to face? If it was 3 officers on the floor, they would have called an all-officer response, or at least a first response. So why are they calling me down there? He's behind a closed door. That's when I honestly thought he might have got out of his, you know, they've unlocked him. He might be free roaming around the CSU, and they're trying to control him, or possibly a hostage.
But he wasn't, was he? He was behind the closed door.
Yeah, so when I get there, my adrenaline was sky high, because I'd literally come from a first response. So I was expecting something rather than just a gentleman wanting a shower. Or, as I suspect, he just wanted a cigarette, because previous to that, I had actually given him about 6 cigarettes. Even though I don't smoke, I carry a pouch of tobacco with me, because it's quite a good de-escalation tool. And I got to the point where I thought, well, is he creating because he just wants another cigarette? So it was a bit... I didn't want to give him a cigarette, because I didn't want him to get into the habit of, I'm going to act up because I want a cigarette, because I've already given him about 6 cigarettes.
So you were irritated because you had to come from different parts of the
Yeah, I
centre?
said I was frustrated because I'd come from a first response. And it was nothing that I felt the officers could deal with. But as per usual, everyone's go-to was get a white shirt, which was always going to be me. Because the Oscar 1's really busy. He was dealing with the first response that I left. The Oscar 2 can't leave reception, because that's such an important role, because you've got people coming in and coming out.
So you said
So
that...
it would be me dealing with it.
You said that you thought it was out of the detainees' earshot.
He was behind a closed door, and I was facing the other direction, walking away.
Does that make these comments any better in your view?
No, not at all. And I said it was inappropriate, and it's what cost me my job and my career.
Do you accept that as a DCM and a CNR instructor and the manager of E-wing, in fact, that you ought to have led a better example for DCOs?
Yeah, but I was under immense stress. I was running all 4 wings and just come from a first response, which was probably about the 18th first response of the day.
And do you accept that kind of abusive language in front of DCOs openly encouraged them to model that kind of language?
The DCOs have got their own brains, but it was an inappropriate comment, and I shouldn't have made it, and I paid the ultimate price, didn't I? So.
Well, DCO Francis may not have. He said he follows your lead, doesn't he? And he says, if you don't, I will.
Charlie was a good officer. He was a very good officer, and I relied on Charlie quite a lot, and I'm sorry that he got tied up in what I said.
The fact that you felt comfortable speaking in this manner in front of DCO Francis shows that it was widely acceptable to speak about detainees like that. Do you agree?
Not the C word. No, that was my own frustrations. But
were there other words that were acceptable?
Said
not the C word.
Not necessarily acceptable, but staff would blow off steam. I use the C word because that's the main word he used against me. I was always the fat white shirt. I was always the fat whatever, the freak. C word, you know what I mean? But because I don't usually use that word. So yeah, it was wrong, and I paid the ultimate price. And I'm sorry, Charlie got caught up in what I said.
So sorry that Charlie got caught up in it. Are you sorry about those words that you said to the detainee?
He didn't hear him. I guarantee you, he didn't hear him.
I want to continue looking at the transcript, please. Page 7, 36, line 36. We'll help us and we'll help you.
Yep.
Line 36. And then you dick us about and we'll make your life a fucking misery. And then just the other side of the margin, 89. Fucking twat he is. And then page 9, 89. Stop being a fucking idiot. Do you accept that you said this?
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
say that you accept that you said this to a detainee, not...
It was through the
in
door.
earshot?
He was being abusive.
But you were trying to communicate to him, weren't you? Telling him to stop it?
Yeah.
So
But
he heard
using
that.
some of the language he was using against me, which is a mirroring technique. But obviously, it wasn't working with him.
A technique that suggests that it's something that you'd thought about before and were doing deliberately. Is that right?
It's called a mirroring technique. It's very effective, and I used it quite a lot. You would go into a situation if someone was aggressive. You would and shouting. You would match their aggressiveness and their volume.
Where did you learn this technique?
It was brainstormed at the NTRG up at Kidlington, and it works very effectively. You match them, and then every sentence after that you lower your tone. And human nature is you mirror the person, and then within a minute you're actually talking. You're not shouting, you're talking. I wasn't saying that's the technique I was using, but those were probably the language he was shouting at me.
So does this mirroring technique include calling someone a fucking idiot?
No, but if he was calling me an idiot, I might have used it, but I can't say that it was the technique I was using, but it is a technique I used.
What about following the next page, page 10, line 19? Be a man, not a child, yeah? What did you mean by that?
Earlier on in the day, he wanted to see the imam, which I arranged because he was down at Tinsley House. And I managed quite reluctantly to get him down because he was off to another appointment. But I managed to convince him to come down to see this particular gentleman. And he sort of said, and the imam's words were he was being quite childish. That's kind of, again, I shouldn't have said it. So.
And do you accept that you again said this to a detainee and within his earshot?
Yeah, through the door, yeah.
Same page, 10, lines 31 to 32, the same person said, I've tried to take my life and you tried to bully me. And you say, 37, do you think I care? I ain't fucking in the mood for you, all right? Why did you say that?
As I said, I'd just come from a first response. And I do believe there was another first response called whilst this was going on, but then that got cancelled. So obviously I have to attend the first response. I needed this conversation to end because I had to go to another first response, and then I do believe an actual first response was called that I had to attend. So I needed to end this conversation. I needed it to end, if you know what I mean, because I had to attend the first response because I'm the first manager on scene.
Do you agree that wasn't an appropriate way to speak to someone who'd told you and you knew had tried to take his own life?
Yeah, I accept that.
Did you care about detainees?
Yes, I did, yeah. A lot, yeah.
Why
I
did you say I don't care?
Frustration. I needed a conversation to end. I needed to go to a first response.
Do you think that was going to de-escalate the situation by saying that?
No, to de-escalate the situation, I needed to step out and use another manager step in. But there wasn't another manager to step in. I do believe someone else did step in the end because I gave him my tobacco and said, give him a cigarette.
Page 16, 20 to lines 20 to 48. You should have, these 728 says, you should have put me on constant, no solitary confinement. And you said, mate, I wasn't there. Well, I was here, but I didn't make the decision yesterday. Detainee says, how can he be punished for trying to take his life? Well, he can be punished for going on the netting. D728. Now, the whole reason I've gone on the netting is to hang myself on the net. And you say, well, you can't hang yourself on the net. Well, of course you can at the end of the day. If you put a rope and a jump, you can hang on it. So why do you want to hang yourself? He says, because I don't want to live without my meds. I've not been taking them for 10 years. So what's happened to your meds? And so on.
I do believe the doctor said he's not on any kind of medication, which was another debate and frustrating situation because he was insisting he needs medication and the doctors were insisting he's not on any medication.
He says there, you should have put me on constant, not solitary confinement.
So I didn't put him in CSU.
Was there a distinction, in your opinion?
Between?
Constant and solitary confinement?
Constant, he could be moved to E-wing, which is a very small wing, next door to CSU. And you could do a constant there with the door open. But he was extremely violent. That's why he was a 3-officer unlock. And I would imagine that would have persuaded the duty director to whatever. I can't vouch for the duty director, but a 3-officer unlock on a constant, it would probably be CSU. It wouldn't be E-wing.
You've mentioned swearing. In your witness statement, you say, I can take this down now, thank you very much, that officers swore at detained people, and this could be for a variety of reasons, one of which you told us today is because of a method of mirroring. Do you think that bad language in general was essentially a method of communication because of the environment, because it was toxic, as you described?
The language wasn't as bad as it was at the start. The main problems we had at the start was a language barrier. Towards the end, it was, the aggression was immense. You were constantly being bombarded with assaults, insults, sorry. So swearing was very much a detainee's way of talking. They'd often talk amongst themselves using swearing, and they'd speak to the officers swearing. Swearing was, it was quite kind. It was not malice. It was not malice, I don't think. And in the type of environment, I suppose it nurtured it. I don't know, to be honest with you.
And do you accept that it's different swearing between officers without it not being in the earshot of detainees than swearing around them or at detainees?
You wouldn't swear at detainees per se, but you wouldn't. But officers talk, of course they do. There's always an underlying air of apprehension, so officers swear, of course they do, we're all human.
The difference between... But do you accept that there's a difference between swearing between officers and between detainees and so on than swearing at a detainee, which you have been shown to have done?
Yeah. And as I say, I paid the ultimate price for it, so...
But do you also accept that there's a problem with talking about detainees in that way, even in private?
People would let off steam, but yeah, I suppose you could say there is a problem, but you're never going to stop that, are you? You're never going to stop people talking about people. People are human at the end of the day.
But using that kind of derogatory language that we've heard in Panorama?
Yeah, But then if they're using it against you every single day,
So do you think it was justified using that language about detainees because detainees were using it against you?
no, we're all human. It's not one about being justified, either. It's just human nature. You swear, you probably don't mean to. You say things you don't actually mean to, but it just happens. I wouldn't say I like it. I wouldn't say I actually encouraged it, but people say what they say. You know, everyone's different, aren't they? Some people don't swear at all.
Thank you, Mr. Webb. I don't have any more questions, but if you wait there, the chair may have some for you.
Thank you. I just have two brief questions for you, Mr. Webb. I want to just make sure that I've understood something that you said quite early on in your evidence in response to Ms. Townsend earlier. You talked about there being losing a lot of staff overnight, is how you put it, and you explained about Gatwick Airport recruiting for security staff, and that also this coincided with the period of time where the third bunks were being put into some of the...
It was roughly around all the same time. It was also, we lost an awful lot of staff to Gatwick security, and then when the third bunks were being put in, actually physically being put in, UK Border Force had a big recruitment, and we lost an awful lot of staff to UK Border Force to work at Gatwick and Heathrow in the passports, because obviously both other industries paid better, so we lost an awful lot of good officers that way.
Okay, thank you. So the question I had was in relation to, you also said that lots of detainees were moved out of Brook House, and that then when you received new detainees to replace them, at that point is when you received lots of time served foreign national prisoners.
Yeah.
So I just want to make sure I've understood it correctly. So physically detainees were moved out for that work to take place?
Yeah, for the work to take place in the room, because obviously we had workmen coming in, so they'd shut the wing down. So they'd offload, I suppose that's an awful, not a Welsh word, but they'd be moved around to other centres. And then we kind of didn't get them back. We got prisons back. We got foreign national offenders back instead of the people we had.
Okay, thank you. So my other question was in relation, you talked a lot about the threats that staff received from some of those time served foreign national offenders. Could you tell me a bit about why were you threatened? What were the threats about? Was it in response to certain things happening?
No, it was. I personally feel they felt they could do whatever they want, because we don't carry batons, we don't carry spray, we don't have the powers of stop and search. We can't search really at all. They were given phones. They didn't have to earn anything. You know, I mean, they were given a kettle. There was a shop. They could come and go. I think they thought, well, this is holiday camp. We can treat the officers any way we like. And if the officer says no, you can't do that, what do they know? They can't stop us. They haven't got batons, have they?
So is that what led to the threats that they...
I just think to the where they'd come from was obviously a harsher regime, and coming to this regime which was much softer compared to Wandsworth, Belmarsh, it is basically a Butlins for them, I suppose. I know it sounds horrible saying it like that, but I suppose it was a much softer environment, and they took advantage of it, which they thought would allow threats, and officers couldn't really do much because we were so short-staffed. What could you do? You were so outnumbered. If you said anything, you'd have a gang on you. You'd be locking yourself in a wing office, calling for a first response to try and get you out.
Did you report it through the form of an SIR or in another way?
Before the beds went in and the foreign nationals, as I said, I had the duty directors basically at my fingertips every morning when we were doing the rounds in CSU and Ewing, and you'd speak to them and you'd say, you know, this is going to be a nightmare, isn't it? And their answer is, yeah, it is, but it's nothing we can do, it's come from above us. And I think it generally did come from above them. It's either Home Office made the decision or G4S made the decision we can earn loads more money by putting an extra bunk in, or something come from somewhere that we need to empty the prisons, so you need to make more beds. So everyone knew it was going to be a nightmare, and there's not a lot we could have done about it, so we just did our best.
Thank you, Mr Webb.
That's all right.
Those are all the questions that I have. I'm grateful for you coming today to give your evidence. I know it's not an easy experience.
No, it's not.
Chair, before you rise, earlier on I mentioned the name of a detained person rather than a cipher. Although there's a general restriction order over such names, we consider it necessary to make a specific one in relation to this particular incident. So I'd ask, therefore, that you make a restriction order over that particular detainee.
I'm happy to do so, thank you. That will be on the record now, and I understand we'll follow up with the necessary paperwork. Thank you very much.
Chair, tomorrow we'll be hearing from Steve Dix, Callum Tully again, and Aaron Stokes.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr Webb. Thank you. I will see you tomorrow at 10.